In this video, we're going to set up NodifyMe from scratch using version 0.4 on a Raspberry Pi. This assumes that you have not installed NodifyMe Studio or the hub or any of the services or service hosts on a Raspberry Pi. It should be very quick. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail in this video on some of the other topics, but we'll make videos on those separately. So first is to go to NodifyMe.com. And we're actually going to start in the doc section. So this video is going to be following along with this document first. And when you get to the bottom of this document, it's going to send you to downloading NodifyMe Studio. Or, I'm sorry, getting started with NodifyMe Studio. So we'll go ahead and download it, and then we'll end up in the same spot. So starting off, we're going to go to downloads and actually get the hub. Now, there are a few ways to actually get the hub and the service host, which we need both of on the Raspberry Pi. You can download these Debian files directly, unzip them, and then install them using the apt-get install command. Or you can download installhub.sh and have the script pull everything down and install it for you. So in this case, you can download this file on your Windows machine and then copy it over to your Raspberry Pi. Or you can use wget, which is built into the Raspberry Pi, to pull this down and then install it that way. So we're going to go ahead and do it that way using PuTTY. So I'm logged in as root, which is important because the Raspberry Pi needs root access to the GPIO pins to utilize them completely. So a lot of the functionality in NodifyMe relies on the fact that you're logged in as root. Okay, so I've gone into the temp directory, which is nice because this is cleaned up every time that the Raspberry Pi restarts. And I'm going to use the wget command that's in the documentation for pulling down this hub. I'm actually going to erase this and just paste it. I'm going to go ahead and run that. That's pulled down. Okay, so before I execute this, I need to give it permission. And the way you do that is using, you may be familiar with chmod. And I'm going to grant those permissions to the script. And then once I do that, I can go ahead and run that script. All right, so this is going to take a second. Okay, so now that this is done, we have the hub and the service host both installed. Now we need to do is start the hub, but what we're actually going to do before we do that is we're going to have the hub start every time the Raspberry Pi starts. The easiest way to do that is to go into your RC local and add the command to start this directly into there. We're going to use, in this case, nano. And you can see that we actually have the command already set up here. So when you get to this point, just make sure it looks exactly like this, and you should be good to go. All right, so now the easiest way is to either reboot or just start it. Make sure it's not actually started already. And it is not. So we are just going to copy the command straight off the documentation on the website and run it like this. Now make sure you grab the command that has the ampersand on the end, because that makes this run in the background and not as the foremost thing that will kind of take over the entire session. So if you see a lot of those error creating directories, if you see these errors, they're not really errors. It's trying to ensure that folders are there and they just happen to be there already. All right, so now this is up and running. And we can see that it's still running even though I Controlled C out of it, which is great. So now we're going to move on to the NodifyMe Studio, which is how you're going to interact with the hub from your Windows box. So I've already downloaded this, and it is over here. And like I said before, you don't have to install NodifyMe.exe, at least not in this version. Later on, you might have to. In this case, you just start it right up. You might get this Windows protected your PC screen, and there's really no way I can get around this. Essentially, it's saying that that Windows doesn't recognize this file because it hasn't been downloaded and used by a lot of other people on the internet. And so it's warning you that it might be risky, but I assure you it's fine. So you'll need to click on More Info and Run Anyway. And you'll be greeted with this empty canvas in your studio. Now we have the hub running on the Raspberry Pi, and we need to connect this UI to that hub. The easiest way to do it is to go into this screen called Find Hubs, and you're just going to turn the scanner on and wait for a little bit. If you have many hubs running in your house, you might want to wait for a little while so you can pull them all in one time. And then when you're finished with that, just go ahead and turn it off to save computer resources. You don't want that running all the time in the background. Now we only have one hub running on our network, so it's pretty easy to determine that this is the one that's running on the Raspberry Pi. We also know because the IP address here happens to be the same as the one we logged into. Chances are you know the IP address of your Raspberry Pi. If you don't, you would use ifconfig, and you can pull it out that way. In this case, it's right here. Anyway, going back to NodifyMe Studio, now that we have this pulled up, we can leave everything as it is. We can change this stuff later, and we're just going to add it. And now you can see that it's now part of our hubs list. So I'm going to go ahead and connect to it. Not much happens the first time you connect because there's not a lot added to your hub. Before I do anything, I'm going to go ahead and rename this as the RPi, just so it's distinguishable when you add, like if you have a hub running on your Windows PC, one running on another Linux box, but not a Raspberry Pi, you can kind of keep them straight, or you can call it Raspberry Pi 1, 2, 3, 4, Outdoor Pi, Weather Station, etc. All right, so here we're showing that we have a host that was installed. This was installed by the script, and it's a special host that runs certain types of programs for the Raspberry Pi. In this case, programs that were written in C++. That part doesn't really matter to you. I think the majority of services are going to be run under this host. So you can just pull that over to active hosts, and this is now something that you can use on your hub. So you can actually pull over a bunch of these. You can have as many hosts running, and essentially each host is able to host a service. So you can have a lot of services running under one host, and if for some reason that service crashes, it may crash the entire host. But if you have many hosts, then the other host will be kind of insulated. These all run in a separate process. So in that way, you're kind of isolating each of these service programs. Okay, so from here, we're going to click on this active host, and we'll see that we don't have any services available. Now, if you're using NodifyMe, then you're probably wanting to utilize some kind of service. In this case, we want to use the Raspberry Pi digital service, which is the service that controls the GPIO pins on the Raspberry Pi. And you get these by going to the website and clicking on the Services tab. And then from here, you'll see a list of services. In this case, or at this moment, we have 4 available. This list will grow into a really, really, really long list eventually. But for this beta release, we're keeping it small. So we're just going to click on the actual service, and you can see there's a lot of documentation that you might want to go through, might not. In this case, we're just going to download the service pack. This is how you install services on the NodifyMe hub. So I've already downloaded this. It's back in my temp folder. And I'm going to install this and this using the NodifyMe UI, NodifyMe Studio. So I'm going to bring that back up, and I'm going to go to Available Services, and I'm going to click on the Add button. Now from here, all you have to do is browse to where you've downloaded your service pack. And you can only do one at a time right now. So I'm just going to select the one service, the RPi Digital, and I am going to add it. And now you can see that it has popped up into our available services. So now that we have something in here, let's go ahead and turn on the service. What you're looking for is to have this start time and this green light turn on. This means that you actually have a process running in your Raspberry Pi. And so if we were to go in here and, well, actually you can see it right now. This is the actual service host running, which is great. So now that we have the service host running, we want to tell it to start one of the services that it has available. So by pulling this available service over to the active services, we're actually telling the service host that this is something that we want run on this service host. So now that it's active, you can click on it, and right now it is stopped, but we want to put it in the start position. So now you have the GPIO pins sitting there waiting for you to program them. For this demo, all we want to do is turn an LED on, and we're going to do that by using a digital pin writer. So I'm going to drag this over to the active nodes. You kind of see that the same theme happens a lot as you go down this hierarchy. You have a hub, and you drag a service host from available to active. Then you have the services within the service host, and you drag from available services to active. And then the same thing for the nodes. Okay, so now that we have this node active, we'll go into this node and just set up some properties. And so we are going to expand this and go to pin number. So pin number is the actual pin that we're going to be writing to. This is already set to 0, which is mapped to GPIO 17. So this uses wiring pi on the back end. Wiring pi is uses a different numbering scheme than the Raspberry Pi numbering scheme. And the reason he did this is that he wanted to have a numbering scheme that doesn't change ever, while the Raspberry Pi numbering scheme can, and I believe has changed. You can use the pin numbers within this library without, a big switch going from the first generation to the third generation to the Pi zeros, etc. So we have ours mapped to 0. I will expand this so you can see which wire that is hooked to, or GPIO pin, I'm sorry. So if you look on this board side, we are 6 pins over from the left. And so the other side of this LED is just hooked to ground. GPIO 17 or wiring pi pin 0 is hooked to this resistor, which is then hooked to the LED. So I'm going to minimize this again. And you should at this point just be able to go into view here. And if you flip this switch to on, your LED should then go to on. So I don't know if you can tell under the bright light, but this is actually on. And I'm going to minimize this, and you may have to squint hard, but you can see the LED turn on and off. There's a little bit of lag with the camera that's pointing at the LED, but it's instantaneous in real life. So I'm going to drag this I'm going to drag the UI off to the side and maximize the camera so you can see it blinking, hopefully. So that wraps it up for how to install the hub on the Raspberry Pi. Once you get to this point, it doesn't. So that wraps it up on how to install the hub on the Raspberry Pi. So that's really the hardest part, getting set up with NodifyMe. Every time you kind of close this out, so that wraps it up for how to install the hub on the Raspberry Pi and how to install NodifyMe Studio. So that's really the hardest part about getting started with NodifyMe, is this initial setup process and downloading, the different components. But every time you start NodifyMe from here on out, it should be a pretty simple process. So if you close this, it remembers that you're logged in. And so if I were to open this back up, you're immediately logged back into where you were. You can go back in and still blink your light. So if you have, between that and having this set up to auto start on the Raspberry Pi, you should be able to do a lot of projects right off the bat just using these GPIO digital pin writer combinations and hooking up, relays and all sorts of stuff. So remember that this is our first beta. So there's going to be a lot of changes on the website, and there's going to be a lot of changes within the UI until version 1. So make sure you subscribe. There should be a lot of videos coming up soon. We don't want you to miss any. And if you have any feedback, please leave it in the comments below. That's the biggest reason we're pushing this out early, is to get as much feedback as we can. So we want you guys to be a part of the upcoming decisions that we're making. Anyway, thank you for watching. Again, please leave your comments below, and we'll see you next time.